Okay, welcome to the first module of the judging playlist. Let's call it like that. Today's video will be looking into how you should judge, and hopefully this will give a comprehensive guide to judging. By judging, I mean the action of going into a debate and evaluating who won and who lost and what are the reasons for that. This is separate from oral adjudication, feedback, and things like that we'll have separate videos for. So this is a video solely for the purposes of how exactly do we judge or come to the right call. Great. So the first thing that we need to do, and I assume that also people who are pretty new watch this, is to understand what this terminology average informed voter means. That debaters use. So for people who are new to debate or people who like hear this for the first time, the average informed voter is the persona that the judge manifests when they adjudicate a debate. It's almost as if like it's a proxy to what the ideal judge would be in this situation. So here are like some broad characteristics of an average informed voter. The first is that he or they or she are not a blank slate. This means that they, in general, know about facts of the world, in general, see what the material reality is, and in general, follow world events. I think the most adequate definition of this is when they see a news, they most likely know about the headline of this news. The base of comparison here is two things. On the one side of the spectrum, it's, I think the terminology is called tabula rasa or whatever, which basically means total blank slate, which means that if then you tell this person, I don't know, the sky is orange or something like that, they maybe think that it is orange. So this was a model of like how judges would be judging in the past, which is wrong. Like, obviously, this is pure craziness if it's like a complete blank slate. There must be some kind of sensibility of which the judge can evaluate different types of claims and things like that. One time I talked with Tin about it, and he shared with me that there was one debate where, for example, a team, anonymous team, ran literally, here are 5 structural reasons why Belarus is a democracy. This is like blatantly false. The average informed voter knows that Belarus is not a democracy, it's a dictatorship, there is no democracy there. So like this is an example of that. On the further end of the spectrum is what about like specialized knowledge and things like that. And here the average informed voter should not understand. Like if you were to say just the word quantitative easing, which a lot of like teams like to say flashy words like this, like quantitative easing, or maybe like, I don't know, something very scientifically specific, the average informed voter is not obliged to understand directly what the words you are saying mean. That doesn't mean that you can't explain these types of processes or explain this specialized knowledge to the average informed voter. The question is just that the burden on more specialized information is higher and demands a higher explanation in order for the average informed voter to understand. So, to summarize, the average informed voter is not ignorant. He, she, they know when something like is turbo scandalous or when it's a topic that they may not necessarily understand. That topic demands an explanation, an illustration as to why it happened the way it happened. So this is the first point of characteristics of the average informed voter. The second is, and I want to stress this a lot, the average informed voter does not have a political leaning. No matter how much debaters would like to make them sound as they do, because like, let's be completely honest, the most people think that the average informed voter is left-leaning and supports like left/socialist ideas and things like that automatically. That is not true. These ideas must be justified within the debate. You need to provide justification as to why certain left ideas are good or certain things are bad. This absent of such justification, the average informed voter is fine to say, for example, let's give a couple of examples, like saying over policing is bad. If you don't give a reason why over policing is bad, the average informed voter can simply say that's not a harm. Or absent of an explanation, I don't necessarily understand why this is a harm. Redistribution is good. Again, you need to explain why this is the case. Otherwise, it's not something necessarily that a judge can just say, yeah, that's good and that's bad. Even if you give minimum explanation here, however, just so people completely understand me, even if you give like first principles explanations as to why these things are good or bad, that's more or less enough for you to do it. The problem is that now debaters don't even do the bare minimum. They just straight up run these claims and people assume, okay, this is good, this is bad. So the average informed voter doesn't have a political meaning. This means that this person can also be persuaded by equally sensible right-wing ideas as well. The third characteristic is that the average informed voter follows logic and evaluates logic. So that means that the average informed voter can be persuaded based on certain ideas or certain policies or certain phenomenon based on the logic given within this. So the average informed voter tracks and evaluates different logical chains of arguments and can evaluate whether or not an argument is proven or not, whether it's impacted or not, whether it's weighed or not, and how the general flow of logic goes. Again, it's not a blank slate. He or she, they are able to evaluate and follow this type of thing. And finally, the average informed voter can be emotionally persuaded by rhetorics. This is not a mathematical competition where we do 1 + 1 = 2. If you want to do that, like go to, I don't know, math camp or something like that, or I don't know, like a spelling bee. This is a game where it is also equal parts theatrics. So even though it is not codified anywhere or written anywhere, you as an average informed voter can be persuaded by the way people impact their case, for example, or the way people explain how crucial a certain mechanism is, or the way that they have an intro that grabs you or catches you and things like that. Not that British parliamentary debating is fully how should I put this, style-based or fully logic-based. Honestly, these two things are in the middle, and like you should always also evaluate this when you're saying, like, if a team manages to very, very emotionally explain to you something and impact the point very, very hardly, this is something that you should consider a valuable contribution to the debate. And you shouldn't be automatically against this. You are, at the end of the day, a human being, and human beings are persuaded by emotions. So these are the inherent characteristics of an average informed voter. Obviously, there is like a bit of a gray area of when do these things stop and start, and here like debating kind of becomes subjective, but the idea is that we can at least codify it to a certain extent so that it is kind of like equal for people have equal playing, the people have an equal ability to win or to lose based on a debate, but still like there is this gray area, and that's perfectly fine. At the end of the day, the idea is not for us to go to what is like the perfect truth, but what is like an approximation of that, and that's like the standard that we should be looking at as judges. So this is on the characteristic that you buy when you go into judge a debate. What is the goal? When you're judging, you basically have three goals. The first is to comprehensively track the debate. The second is to reach the right call. And the third is to facilitate a good discussion where all comparisons or all teams are discussed. These are the three goals that are both for chairs and both for wings. These are the three goals that you should have when you're going in to judge a debate. And these are like the three milestones when we're particularly looking at judging. Again, oral adjudication and feedback are separate parts of the process. We'll have videos on those. But here, like, these are the three goals that you are walking inside. And so the next slide will look at each and every one of these goals and how we're best able to achieve them. So let's look at tracking best practices. I think the first and most important thing is to just use a pen and paper and not a laptop. Now, I know that this is like kind of a controversial take, and like the debating community hasn't had a very comprehensive discussion on the topic, but honestly, it is problematic that judges, when they walk into the debate, now when they have the capacity to write literally every physical word that you are saying, debating has become like this tracking exercise where people are like forced to write down massively, and it does kind of trade off with your capacity to evaluate and understand the idea. But secondly, it allows for you to look at not so much like the argument in terms of literally all of the density of the argument, but what are like the crucial inherent parts of the argument, which is best utilized by pen and paper. So there is such a trade-off, and I would advise you when you're judging to to do this. And by the way, the reason that I'm highlighting this as a problem is that I just believe that this is such a big issue in debating. Literally, any competition I go, I see this as an issue where people like track 100% everything you said and don't necessarily evaluate the argument or the speech, fully. Which brings us to the second thing, which is you don't have to write down everything. You don't have to write down every word people say, every sentence they say, everything's like that. You are trying to track so that you have at least a basic level understanding and memory of what happened within the debate so that you can recall it as a tool to do that particular thing or as a tool to follow logic and do it. That doesn't mean that you have to follow everything people said, and usually debate comparisons, and as you continue to like evolve, usually come down to like maximum of 3 things that people said, most likely 1 or 2 things in most debates that you can evaluate clashes on and see what their contributions are. Especially if we're talking about the medium level debater and we're not talking about like the higher rooms where maybe you have to do a bit more, but it more or less is the case. So please, if you're watching this and if you feel forced to track down everything teams said, and later if they ask you like, oh, what about this one liner that I have, or what about this, it's perfectly fine to say, I didn't think this was super important to the clash. The thing that was important to the clash is this. Here are reasons why. That's why I didn't talk about it in the discussion or whatever. The third thing is to have like a clear separation of the speeches. So what I've noticed some judges do is, for some reason, they write very mixedly. Like they write in a way where they're writing one speech and then another. It's good to have like a clear separation of each team's contributions separately. The way that I do it is like I fold a piece of paper and then I fold another piece of paper, and voila, I have like 8 different brackets where I can write their speeches down. But what's important is to have a separate sheet, or at least this is how I do it. Maybe other people do it differently, where you are like doing a cross between this and you are writing down what are the most important contributions from each team in like one sentence, and then how like different teams interact between each other on this different sheet of paper. The reason this is important is that you have separation on how you're tracking people and making sure that you've written down what are their important contributions and how then they interact between each other. It's a bad thing to get these things intertangled, because then when you're giving, for example, like explanation of the call and feedback, it kind of gets a bit all mushy. So having a separation of the process is important. The same way as like when you're debating, you have a separate sheet for argument 1, separate sheet for argument 2, separate sheet for framing and stuff like this. And finally, even though I said this before, but it's important for you to understand and evaluate the idea and the contributions of the debater, rather than making sure you're writing down everything. Because after a certain moment, this process of just making sure you track down everything trades off in the limited time you have with your capacity to make sure you understand the debate, evaluate contributions, and do this. The very simple way you can test this is the next time you're judging, think about, are you wasting time tracking and wasting time doing all of these things, as opposed to whether or not you're holistically evaluating different arguments and stuff like that. So the bottom line is, try to write down the most crucial ideas. Don't feel obliged to write down everything, and like just make sure you have adequate best practices in terms of tracking. I want to note one thing here. If you are judging ESL speakers, and particularly very, 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 very ESL speakers, and you're having a hard time to understand what they're saying, I think it's perfectly fine to, let's say, extend yourself in terms of trying to understand more or trying to understand what they're trying to say and things like that. Like it's perfectly legitimate. Not everyone has the same equal amount of control of the English language. But honestly, if for example they are truly not understandable to you, where even if you are putting an effort, that speaker is not is not super understandable. It is super good feedback to just tell them, look, I really didn't understand your speech. There were this and these moments where it was hard. And, giving them advice, like, for example, maybe slowing down a bit more, maybe saying these things more clearly would have been beneficial. Of course, you should do this if you actually, did the extra step of, trying to make sure you understand them and trying to make sure that you're tracking them adequately. There are many of these judges that straight up don't track and straight up don't care, which is horrible. and then they think it's perfectly legitimate for like you to just say, I didn't really get that, I'm sorry. I think the adequate middle ground solution is just making sure you do everything you can, and if you can't, just go and tell them in feedback, this is what you need to improve. That's perfectly fine. So that's the note on tracking. Evaluation of the debate. We're basically evaluating 4 different components. There's going to be a second slide with 3 or 4. The first is the level of analysis or level of explanations of people that people give. And I want to stress this a lot. The times I have been judged by people who straight up don't care about this stuff, or the times where I have judged with people who also straight up don't care about this stuff, is like too much to count. People are just straight up buying ideas without necessarily them evaluating what is the level of analysis that is provided, and without necessarily evaluating the burden of the argument that is given in order for you to buy it in this crucial moment. This is a rampant problem because it allows for people basically to run crazy shit and for them to get away with it. And the more, if you want to truly improve as a judge, this is the first fundamental thing that you should ask yourself, which is to ask yourself, did the team actually prove the thing that they set out to prove? And here are just some 4 basic questions that you should ask yourself. The first thing is, how well connected is the logic that is explained in this particular moment? Are they very unclear when they're explaining some kind of thing? Did they, for example, start and stop and start again when they're explaining a specific logical link? So they made sure it's convenient for you to understand and to evaluate the analysis provided. Second most easy question, is it asserted? Did they, for example, say the word cognitive dissonance and for them to expect for you to straight up go, yeah, that sounds legit, bro? Or did they, for example, use quantitative easing? Or did they say something like just war theory and things like that? Or did they actually provide an explanation as to what do these words mean, how they interact with the debate, what is the analysis behind it, and how does this change? These are very simple questions that you could ask yourself to gauge the level of assertions that people give to this. Is the explanation that they're giving intuitive or understandable? Or the reverse, is it counterintuitive and not understandable? Are they expecting you, for example, to connect 2 and 2 logical pieces that don't have a logical connection between each other? It's perfectly fine when you're evaluating a debate to not understand what the speaker is explaining, or to, as long as you're able to just point out to the fact that you don't think that this logic is intuitive and don't think that it does the particular goal that you are talking about. And finally, is there a logical hole within the case? I.e., if, for example, they explained they're running backlash and they explain, oh, people will get mad, but then there is another link between people get mad and people taking actions. If they didn't fill this link, can we buy the argument and things like that? So ultimately, with these tools, you have to be a bit controlled when you're using and when you're evaluating these type of things. So think about it this way. You can't be a madman who goes around and just tries to poke holes in people's cases, rebut them, and say this stupid bullshit case, I shouldn't buy them. But on the other side, you shouldn't be one of those judges that simply just credit the idea and credit the explanation, credit the analysis without having the bare minimum of explanation, looking at whether or not it is adequately explained and stuff like that. There is a middle ground between these 2 things where you are evaluating the level of analysis that teams are providing and asking yourself, okay, am I scrutinizing them too more? There must be some kind of middle ground where you're able to adapt this. The reason I am putting an emphasis on this is I think the balance tilts more to just straight up buying stuff without necessarily looking at what is the extent of analysis provided. So maybe, and for this could be for most judges, maybe just adding this layer of questions would tilt you more to the center instantaneously, and you will see massive improvement just by asking yourself these questions. But second thing to note here, and this is applicable for all of these things, is that debating is comparative. I.e., let's look at this theoretical situation. We have one team that asserts their claim but gives some kind of explanations here and there, versus another team that totally 100% asserts their claim. And if we had to evaluate solely based on the level of explanation provided, one team that has a greater, assuming all things are equal, so no rebuttal, no weighing, and the statements have relatively the same burden between them, then the team with the more analysis should intuitively be the team that is more likely to win in these situations. Keep all of this in mind, because these things are at the end of the day comparative. So maybe you could be in a very bad room where no one has an explanation. One team has some kind of incentive explanation. You can go with them, and stuff like that. And finally, a team doesn't have to point this out to you. You yourself should be able to, when evaluating the chain of logic and when evaluating the burdens and explanations of arguments, you should be able to see it. It is helpful if teams point this out to you where there is no explanation, no analysis, but you yourself should also be able to see and note these things down on your own. So that's on analysis. The second criterion is engagement. By engagement, I mean like rebuttal, mitigation, things like that. The things that we covered in the previous videos. It is a huge shame in debating that firstly, people just simply straight up don't respond to each other anymore. People just don't give rebuttal. People just don't give responses. And people don't handle responses. Like there is a terrible trend of non-rebuttal happening. And I think the reason for this is that honestly, because judges don't really care about that enough. Whereas responses and rebuttal is an adequate way for you to win, for you to win a debate. Like even if you don't have the best argument of the world, if you straight up stand up and destroy the other side, you are still technically more likely to beat them within the debate. So how do we like evaluate rebuttal? The most basic question that we should ask ourselves is, did the other team respond at all? Because in many of these cases, there are many teams that just straight up don't respond. So if the teams didn't respond and another team responded, maybe that's a very good reason to give for that team against another. But secondly, we need to also evaluate the persuasiveness of the response provided. I.e., is the response a response that, for example, attacks the heart of the argument, so like a core premise that if disproven, the entire chain of argumentation breaks? Is the response, for example, a more flippant response, like let's say responding to the example rather than the core logic and saying, oh, this example is wrong, but then the argument still stands? Is the response, for example, a response to a premise that sure, it can be responded to, but isn't that important as other premises that have been analyzed within the debate? So you should always evaluate the persuasiveness of each response. But more crucially and more interestingly, you should also track whether or not teams explain themselves the importance of a response. So if a team were to for example, stand up and tell me, look, this is a core premise within opening government's case. From closing opposition, we're going to directly respond to it. And that way we're already outweighing opening opposition if we attack them, if we take a higher burden within the debate and comprehensively attack them within the round. So I personally love to hear things like that. It is like maybe one of my biases as a judge. I really, really like it when teams stand up and explain to me what they're doing and what is the intention behind their strategy within the debate. It makes super much sense to me, and it makes my life a lot more easier. Even if you don't necessarily do it, the fact that you are at least attempting to do it means that you are, you at least are trying to explain to me your strategy, and you're conveying to me the idea that you are thinking about these things. And finally, like just mitigation. Mitigation is an important tool within debating, like we covered. Sometimes you can just mitigate the other side so that your impacts are bigger than theirs or easier to compare. So this is also something to evaluate in terms of engagement. So bottom line is, don't disregard rebuttal. We evaluate rebuttal the same way as you evaluate analysis and argumentation. And a team that hypothetically all things are equal, if two teams have the equal amount of arguments between each other, a team that responds is more likely to beat the other team. Cool. Weighing. So weighing is the easiest way for you to understand when a team is winning or not winning. Weighing can be both explicit and implicit. So explicit weighing is literally when a team stands up and says, we will weigh against this argument. The weighing is blah, blah, blah. This is why our argument beats their argument. This is like the clearest form of weighing. It's like super easy to do. It's like if a team does it, it's like super easy for you to track and to say, okay, the team gave explicit weighing against this team. This is the reason why they should beat them. This is cut and clear. People should like look at these type of things. There is things, for example, like implicit weighing though. So this is when teams don't literally say the word weighing, and don't maybe they also don't even try to weigh, but they are kind of weighing as they go along. So this could be, for example, if a team is explaining the importance of their argument. If, for example, saying this is why this should be an important key issue within the debate. Implicitly, what they're telling you is that this should be, if they win on this particular clash, then that should mean that they are beating the other teams within the debate. Of course, in the ideal situation, a team should have explicit weighing, but this is judging. We're not operating within ideal situations. And it's perfectly fine for you if you think a team is very, very close to like an explicit weighing. It's just that the weighing is implicit and they don't say the words we are weighing. To take this weighing into account when you're evaluating two teams between each other. And finally, like all things, weighing needs to be proven. And here the most basic example that I could give here is like people standing out, we care about the most vulnerable minority and things like that, and never actually explaining why we care about the most vulnerable minority, just saying it as a catchphrase, or like saying, we have more people. Okay, firstly, why do you have more people affected by this? Secondly, why should we care about the majority of people? Weighing needs to be substantiated and reasons need to be given for this weighing. You shouldn't, so like the other trap here would be, just because a team says the word weighing but doesn't actually weigh, so they don't actually substantiate their weighing, is also a reason to, for example, not give it to them if they are a team that doesn't really explain these particular things. So that is on weighing. If you can see, there's a pattern here. It's just critically evaluate what teams are giving, and like don't be like with a hood on your head, and try to critically evaluate what teams are given, and try to track the most important thing rather than anything else. Finally, other considerations. These are like things that I didn't necessarily know how to bucket them, so like I just put them in other considerations. Contradictions. Remember, contradictions do not mean automatic force. They just mean that you're disregarding the second idea. So if, for example, a team is openly contradicting their idea and their second idea, and this second idea they spent a lot of time on it, but it's an open contradiction, maybe this is a reason for you not to give them the debate as opposed to other team. Again, this doesn't mean that you're auto-forcing them. This just means that if, depending on the extent of how much they harm themselves with this contradiction, this may mean that they should be lower within the debate. Secondly, whether or not teams are strawmanning or steelmanning each other. So this is basically, are teams engaging in good faith? Are they taking the other side's argument at their best and responding to that and weighing against that? Or are they purposefully making the other side's argument sound worse, or purposefully making the other argument sound worse than it actually is, in order to increase the persuasiveness of this argument? Now, there is a fine line between mitigation and strawmanning a case. So like if a team is strawmanning, misinterpreting the words, just being straight up dicks towards each other, then maybe that's also a reason to think that they're not engaging in good faith, if the other team, for example, did engage in good faith and did have these particularly well-made responses. And finally, POIs. I've given like some debates based on POIs. Like by the given debates, I mean like if it's a close third or fourth, second or third, first or second, like it's important to take POIs into consideration, especially on long clashes, where like this is the only way of two teams to engage between each other, and if like the debate itself is close. For example, at Worlds, I think one of the team rankings, I did end up doing them based on the POI that was given from one team to another. So yeah, it is something important to look at when the debate is super, super close. When it's not close, it's perfectly fine. Like it's not mandatory to look at it. Okay, so the bottom line is, these are the ways that we evaluate the debate. These are the questions that you should ask yourself. A good way for you to do this is, for example, to, let's say, see a recording debate, maybe ones that I post on this channel, maybe some others, judge it, try to ask yourself these types of like questions, and then put on the OA and see how close is your justification to the person, or if not, if there is no OA recorded, then just give the OA as you would at a normal tournament. Cool. Then we are reaching the point of discussion. So there are, again, I couldn't really structure this properly, so there are just a couple of things to note in a discussion, but let's before that explain what is a discussion. So after the debate is done, the teams go outside, and then the panel that's comprised of a chair and a panelist, or maybe multiple panelists, discuss based on what is the ranking. So in the first 1 to 2 minutes, you should be able to arrive at an initial call. It doesn't have to be a perfect call, but you should know, for example, if OG is first, O is second, CG is third, and CO is fourth, or whatever combination that you prefer in this moment. 100% you will have differences in calls. This is perfectly normal. Don't worry, it's perfectly fine. What then happens is a discussion where the discussion is pairwise in terms of what teams are beating what. So when you are discussing, you need to have contributions within the discussions, i.e. you need to explain why one team beats another team based on why. The first thing is that contributions must be pairwise. The amount of times I've seen judges, panelists like talk about other teams when we're talking about specific discussions is too much than it actually should. We are just discussing OG versus OO, then we're just discussing OG versus CG, then we're just discussing CG versus OO, etc., etc. So when you are discussing these type of things, just make sure that they are pairwise, why one team beats another, and that the sole idea of the discussion is just simply to come to the truth as to why one team beats another. Most people start discussing OG versus OO in the majority of cases, although this may not be a particular rule. After this happens, you can either call in a vote and see whether or not like what the majority panel's opinions is. So for example, you can split here. You could say, I still think, for example, OO beats OG or something like that. Or you can flip your opinion and like agree to that. But what is important is after you've agreed to what the ranking is in this discussion, then the later parts of the discussion are still operating within this framing. So if we agree opening government beats opening opposition, then this is the agreement that which we have come for the later discussion. So when we bring closing government to the mix, closing government cannot beat opening government but lose to opening opposition. It's just the way that the game works because of pairwise comparisons. Second thing is your contributions need to be relevant. So this is again something that we talked about. So what I see many judges do is they just like say, oh, they said this, then they said this, then they said that, then they talked about this thing and things like that. No. It's usually one or two things of which people said that are the reasons for why they should rank above or below a certain team. You should ask yourself more the question of what did they end up proving? Like what is the thing that actually has a substantial amount of explanation towards it, so that you can comprehensively say this is the thing that they ended up proving and is relevant and things like that. You don't have to talk about the one little one-liner argument that they talked about for 1 minute that isn't proven. The third thing is keep it short and precise. There isn't a lot of time. And usually these things really, as I said, come down to like small things, like not small things, but small things numerically. So like just saying, I think opening opposition beats opening government because firstly, secondly, thirdly, and then I'm done. And you just explain this in like a minute and a half. And then the chair can give it to the other panelists and we can like argue about it. So just keep it short and precise. It's super crucial. Fourthly, don't just straight up agree with the judge because they have rep. Trust me, no chair likes this. There is no chair that likes to hear that you have one call and then that's like totally different from the chair's call. There's like 1-2 minutes of discussion and then, I flip. I'm persuaded by what you said. That means that you were never really persuaded in your thoughts to begin with, which signals to the chair that like you aren't really like trying in this moment. So like I want to be clear to separate this from the two extremes. So extreme one is just arguing with the chair brutally and like basically almost fighting with them, which like you shouldn't do. The discussions should be civilized. They should be based on the core things that we agreed and things like that. The other thing is just to like straight up, yeah, I agree with what you said and things like that. Obviously, there's a middle ground where you could have a comprehensive discussion and maybe the chair could even persuade you. But this must happen and it must be something that you are working towards rather than, like just, oh yeah, I agree with your call. I don't really want to argue, things like that. Like you need to show some backbone that you actually believe in the things that you are trying to do. This is like I've given I always give higher scores to people that actually argue with me and actually try to provide me the other point. So that way I facilitate, I either flip or I facilitate my own viewpoints on the debate much harder. And finally, speaks. When you're giving out speaks, when you have the ranking, look at the speaker scale and give to it. Don't like just arbitrary write numbers like, I think this is a 75. No. Read the speaker scale and ask yourself, are these arguments presented within the scale that they are talking about? And then you will be done. Okay, so this is it. If we go back again, what were the goals? Comprehensively track the debate, reach the right call, facilitate a good discussion. These are the tools for you to do these 3 particular things. I hope this video was helpful. The next video will most likely be on oral adjudication, after that on personal feedback. See you in the next video.